Being buried in the tomb is the world trying to bury the truth about Jesus. But his church couldn't accept him being gone, and that is why they kept visiting the tomb. It was to keep what he taught preserved. When he appeared after his resurrection, it was to those who belonged to his church, and for 2,000 years he has been speaking to the rest of mankind through it. No matter what misconceptions I've corrected about Jesus, you'll notice there is one thing I haven't changed, and that is that Jesus is the Christ, is the divine Son of God, and he did come to this earth to give his life for the forgiveness of our sins. And then he rose to life and appeared to his disciples after being crucified. The reason this isn't changed is because even if you haven't believed anything else I've written, or you want to poke holes in and point out everything you don't agree with, we will never have a disagreement on this point. If you are a faithful believer, because it's these points that you need to believe if you are to be saved and blessed. Having faith in and not doubting this miraculous sign, even though you weren't there to see it, is what will keep Jesus and God's peace with you. And the doors of his kingdom will never be locked to you, because your name has already been recorded in the Lamb's Book of Life. The gates of the city may never close, but they are locked to you if you are not found written in the Book of Life. God never intended for us to have a choice. We disobeyed his command not to eat from the tree of good and evil. The ability to choose came after, and that is the choice to return. And even then we really cannot choose to not be with him, because we already weren't. How can you say to not be with him is a choice, but you can make if in fact that choice was not made by you, but by Adam? If you're not with God, it is really because you haven't made a choice. When Jesus returns and everyone believes we are the divine children of God, then we become the new Jews in New Jerusalem. When you bow down to Jesus, it is saying that you realize you would be spiritually dead if not for him. And only by accepting the divine truth that Jesus imparts on us can you be raised up off the ground so that you can walk in divine holiness. You wanted to see those that witness for God fail and fall in your city? Well, I want to see your way fail, and I want to see you fall in my city. Bow down. I'll show you which city is greater. The only way we can gain is if man's way fails, because then instead of doing it man's way, we'll be doing it God's way. You shouldn't sell your soul in exchange to be someone's slave. When you work for just enough to barely live, you have done exactly that. When Jesus returns, he separates those that belong to God from those that don't. That is why the world is figuratively like Egypt. He causes God's children to exodus from it. Working in the kingdom of the beast is being in bondage to it. You are one of its slaves when you do. To destroy one kingdom is to create another. The firstborns of all the Egyptians dying during the Passover is not what you think or have been taught. It's like the same thing God told the Israelites. Consecrate to me every firstborn male. But since the Egyptians had other gods, they didn't. So they became spiritually dead. Only those Egyptians who became Israelites by believing in the same one true God were spared. Even those that did were still considered dead as far as the Egyptians were concerned, because they no longer belonged to them or belonged to their gods. Unbelievers look at being alive to God as being dead to them. But even becoming spiritually dead from a God they didn't follow was enough to scare the daylights out of them. That is why they asked to be blessed afterwards by the God of Israel, so that the God didn't destroy the rest of them with that same plague on their spirits. They didn't want to be all considered spiritually dead. The thought of it was enough to make them cry out to the Lord to remove it from just the firstborns. And it should also cause you to cry out to God to remove it from you. Because God is now saying the same thing to all of us, not just the firstborns. If you don't consecrate yourself to God, you are spiritually dead. This is the final plague brought upon the world that will cause being allowed to separate, cause our being allowed to separate from it. The people who don't want any part of our belief that we are all God's divine children will want us to get away from them, because even if they don't believe, it's not much fun having the thought of someone else's God fighting and placing curses on you. And just like they did then, they will say, just get away from here, take whatever you want and go. That is why I know it was a spiritual death and not a physical death, because they were just a wee bit too friendly for it to have been a physical death of millions of people. When you are spiritually dead, God is not your God, because He is the God of the living. To be spiritually alive, God has to become your Father, because to become spiritually alive, you have to be spiritually born. And to be spiritually born, you need a father and a mother, which is the church that brings forth His children. The church is Jesus's and God's wife and the mother to their children. God has given Jesus the fathership role by giving His children to Jesus as bride. So Jesus with the bride can bear more divine children. So that means God has become the grandfather. Those of you who have a real problem with me saying that Jesus is not the one and only Son should be able to accept this. But the truth is, even with looking at it this way, it still can be said God fathered us. It's similar to saying Jesus is the son of David, when actually he would have been a grandson. But however you look at it, it is all the same thing. It doesn't matter whether you are born from the wisdom my Spirit teaches you, or from the wisdom God's Spirit teaches you, because it's the same Spirit and the same wisdom, so it can only produce the same children.